Welcome to the Putnam County Library. Today we have a very special lunch and learn with Gordan Fraser, who experienced childhood in Europe and England during World War II.
Cynthia, thank you for having me here. I appreciate it, and I thank all of you for being here. Let me just say at the start that if during anything that I say causes you to want to ask a question, please interrupt, and I will try to answer it as best I can. Now, having said that, I'm going to throw in a little quibble here. We were talking earlier, a couple of us, and I realized that most of my early life, from being born up to the age of 8, has simply gone. I just don't remember it. And I suspect that I was 8 when the war started, and there must be a little bit of post-traumatic stress in there, because I remember everything after that quite well. So, anyhow, my name is Gordan Fraser. I was born in a town called Gateshead-on-Tyne in the county of Durham. Now, just so you understand, the county of Durham is the equivalent of the state of Tennessee. Here in America, we have 3 lists of government: city, county, and state. In England, there are 2, city and county, or as in places like Yorkshire, a shire is the equivalent of a county. So, I was born in Gateshead on the River Tyne, and again, if you think about England, this side on the left is the Atlantic Ocean going all the way up 3,000 miles to America. If you go on the other side, you come to Norway and then Sweden and Denmark and those places. England is that little peninsula that sticks up in the middle, and just to give you a feeling of what it means, the distance from the south of England to Edinburgh is about 650 miles. Now, to put that into your proper perspective, if you get in your car in Memphis and drive to the North Carolina line, you've gone 457 miles, almost the entire length of England. And then again, up here where you see the word United Kingdom, that's probably the narrowest point of England, 72 miles. That, of course, is famous because it is a place where the first people to conquer England were the Romans. The Romans were having trouble with the Scots coming down, raiding into England and stealing cattle and people and what have you. And the Emperor Hadrian went up there and said to his commanding general, "What's the problem?" And the general said, "If I'm here, they raid over there, and before I can get my troops over there, it's too late. They've gone back to Scotland with cattle and everything that they've stolen." So Hadrian built what is today called Hadrian's Wall, a 72-mile across England. And it worked. Now, I find it interesting when we talk about walls today and the problems that arise there. But Hadrian's Wall did its job. So now, I say I was born in Gateshead-on-Tyne. Probably none of you have ever heard of Gateshead-on-Tyne. Some of you may have heard of Newcastle. You see it right up there, Newcastle-on-Tyne. I mention it because it has a bearing on my childhood, especially during the war. Newcastle was the biggest, continues to be today, the biggest city in the whole north of England. It has a terminus of the A1, which is the equivalent of Interstate 40. And A1 goes from London to Newcastle in a straight line built by the Romans. Okay? When the railroads came along, they said, "Oh, that's a good way to go." They built their railroad line parallel in the A1, and it ends in Edinburgh, Scotland today. So, if I say I'm from Newcastle, then many people have heard of Newcastle. There's a little story that goes along with it. Second World War, a U-boat comes up in the first weeks of the war and stops an American ship coming over to England. And the U-boat captain says, "Where are you going?" And the American captain says, "Newcastle." And the German says, "What are you carrying?" He says, "Coal." "Oh, okay, go ahead." Newcastle is the center of the biggest coal industry in England. Why would anyone carry coal to Newcastle? So, Newcastle for me has been very much the center of my story here. So let me go on to say, why was Newcastle a major target? I mean, we all know London was a major target. We all know Birmingham, Manchester, Coventry were all major targets during the war. But why Newcastle? Newcastle, in my day, as a boy, had 5 shipyards building warships. It had the biggest railroad intersection in all of England. Any ships coming from America, many of them came around the north of Scotland, up the River Tyne to Newcastle, and discarded their cargoes right there. So it was a major port. My first early memory was in 1938, when the people built a factory. The people in Gateshead, England, built a factory to produce ammunition for the war effort that they felt was sure to come. The King and the Queen and Princess Elizabeth came to open that factory, and I can remember standing on the curb, waving my little English flag, and seeing the King and Queen go by, and Princess Elizabeth. Okay, so the war started, and just for the record, Germany invaded Poland on September 1. The British and the French governments had made a treaty at the end of World War I with the Poles that said, if you're ever attacked, we will come to help you. So the British and the French sent notes to Hitler saying, bring your troops out. You don't want to do this. Hitler ignored him. So on the 3rd of September, England and France declared war on Germany. It's a little bit of a different throwback to the start of the war. So then the British government had been, as I mentioned earlier, preparing for something like that. They built this ammunition factory just because. They also started preparing to evacuate children. The World War II is something that you need to understand. It is the first time that there was ever a military action against civilian populations. A war was always this army versus this army, and they fought. Second World War, let us destroy the will of the people and they will surrender. And that was the whole point of what became the German Blitz. Now, the British government, expecting something like that, put out a program of evacuating children out of the cities into the safety of the countryside so that they wouldn't be attacked by that kind of activity. So basically today I want to talk about 3 separate things, and they are evacuation, bombing, and rationing. So let's start with evacuation. I was 8 years old. I went to school, and the teacher was standing at our classroom, and she handed each student a note and said, take this note home to your mother. So we all turned around, we went back home. I gave my note to my mother, and she read it, didn't say anything, gave it to my grandmother to read, and she looked at it and went into the bedroom, opened up my closet drawers and started taking out a pair of shoes, some underwear, a pair of shorts, a pair of jackets, whatever, a set of clothing, put it in a brown paper bag, tied it up, stuck it under my arm, and my mother said, go back to school. And my grandmother said, you be a good boy. So I went back to school. We got back there and they lined us up 2 by 2 and marched us down to the railroad station, which is about 2 miles from where our school was. There's a train there, and all of we kids got on the train and away it went. Now, I was, excuse me, I was in a group that wound up going to a town called Ripon, which is in the area of Yorkshire. Did any of you ever watch the program All Things Bright and Beautiful? About the vet in Yorkshire? Well, that's what this town was like, just like Garrowby. So we get there on the train and it stops and the headmaster got off and someone from the city said to him, there are 20 homes here who will take 2 children. So they got 40 of us off the train and away went the train. That's the last I saw of anybody on the train for 2.5 years. God works in funny ways. 18 of the 20 kids were put in houses in the village of Ripon. 2 of us were sent to a house on the outskirts, which was the home of the county banker. And his home was being run by his 2 old retired school teachers. They decided that their part of the war effort was to take these 2 boys from the city and teach them to a proper English gentleman rearing. I was taught not to come to dinner without having washed my hands and face. I was taught not to come to any meal without putting on clean clothes. I was taught which knife, which fork, which spoon is the proper one to eat for any meal. Many of you may have heard the Latin expression veni vidi vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. They taught me some Latin. They also taught me amo, amas, amat, I love, you love, we love. I learned some Latin. They also taught me some French. All of this during the first 6 months that I was there. After 6 months, my parents found out where I was. So my dad, on the Sunday that he wasn't working, came on the train to find his son. Rang the doorbell, was greeted by one of the sisters, and he was allowed to see me. I was allowed to say, "Good afternoon, Father." And then they said to my dad, "We would appreciate your not coming. It is too disruptive to our efforts to raise this boy." So my dad left, came back home, talked to my mother and my grandmother, and my grandmother and mother said, "Go back and get him and bring him back." He can go through the bombing with the rest of us. And that's how I wound up during the bombing there. Now, I found out, and it's very interesting, the things that you don't know until you look. I found out that evacuation, as I know it, was not a mandatory thing. 71% of the children in Newcastle, 10,800, were evacuated. The others, their parents wouldn't let them go. In Newcastle, 28,000 children were evacuated. The rest of them, their parents wouldn't let them go. But I did not know, no one ever said to me that that program existed that way. I just thought everybody was evacuated as I was. So anyhow, I came back home to Newcastle, Gateshead actually, and some interesting things happened in the 1940 July. The Germans started, well, they'd been bombing London all along, ever since the beginning of the capitulation of France and the thing at Dunkirk where all the army came across. They started bombing Newcastle in July of 40, and through December of 41, it was a regular thing to have bombing going on. There were something over 400 people killed in what is called the Newcastle Blitz. Other cities had a much higher death toll than we did, but we were further away. It took longer for them to fly an airplane all the way up to Newcastle, drop its bombs, turn around, fly all the way back, being constantly under attack by Royal Air Force. It eased for the Germans when they conquered Norway, because then they could just come across the North Sea, about 125 miles, and get to us. I mentioned that ships could go around the north of England and come in through the River Tyne and stop there and then unload their cargoes, and everything was there to be shipped out. It's called a marshalling yard when they build a train to go to a particular point. Newcastle was the biggest marshalling yards in the north of England. Okay, so in comes a convoy, and some of the ships in that convoy are carrying sugar. We'll talk about rationing later, but sugar was one of those things that is rationed, and this was the ration for the north of England for 6 months. The night that they got the cargo unloaded and starting making trains to distribute it, the Germans came over, they bombed Newcastle, they dropped nothing but incendiaries, and they set the sugar on fire.
Oh.
Now, my part of all of this is that when they set the sugar on fire, it burned, it melted, it ran out, and all the fire department could do was squirt it back in and let it burn. The Germans came over and they bombed us at 6 o'clock at night, 9 o'clock at night, and 1 o'clock in the morning for 5 straight days. And we spent most of our time in air raid shelters. Now, air raid shelters were a number of possibilities here. If, for example, you ever got caught unawares and bombs started falling and you were in your house, the safest place to this day, the safest place to go is under the chimney. If you look at a wrecked house, you'll see that the chimney still stands. And back in the day, coal was kept in a cellar under the chimneys. So we would just head for the coal cellar. If we had time, we went out to our air raid shelter. Now, again, at the beginning of the war, the British government started working on a facility that they called an air raid shelter. Again, I will pass, you've got a picture there, but I'll pass another one out for you. I have a copy here of some numbers that I want you to have. You might be interested in looking at that one. The typical air raid shelter was 6 feet high, 4.5 feet wide, and 6.5 feet long. It was built of corrugated steel up into a shape, as you can see up there. Bolted down the top, 3 panels in the back to close off the back end, 2 panels in front, and a 3rd panel with a doorway cut into it so that you could get down into the air raid shelter. The purpose of it was that you went into your backyard and you dug a pit, 4 to 5 feet deep, 12 feet long, sufficient width, and then you put this together and stuck it in the pit. Took all of the dirt that you dug out of the pit and piled it up on top. When there was an air raid, you went out in your backyard and you went into your air raid shelter and you sat there till the all clears went up. That kind of shelter, that's a typical picture of it, that kind of shelter was safe from anything but a direct hit. If a bomb fell in the yard next door, your air raid shelter protected you. Now, the government also built air raid shelters out in the streets at certain places. You've seen pictures in London, people going down in the subway and spending time in the subway. In places where there weren't anything like that, they built a concrete box. It might be 20, 30, 40 feet long, 20 feet wide, whatever, but people could go in there and be safe from shrapnel or anything flying around. If a bomb fell nearby, that structure was liable to collapse. Either the walls gave in or the roof gave in. So we always felt we were better off in there. But interesting thing, I was in one of those shelters. I wasn't home when I'd gone in from something, wherever I was. And I was sitting in there, and to this day, when I go to see a doctor, someone will ask me, "Do you smoke?" And I said, "No, I don't smoke." "Did you ever smoke?" "Yes, I did." "When did you stop?" 1965. "Oh, okay." But nobody ever asked me, why did I stop? I started smoking in 1942, 43, somewhere in there. Sitting in an air raid shelter, I see all these adults lighting up and saying, oh, that makes me feel better. Okay, that sounds good to me too. I'm going to smoke. I started smoking at that age. There was a couple of times that I had the opportunity to go to a soccer game. Newcastle United is a major soccer team in English soccer. Okay? So I was over in Newcastle watching a soccer game. It's played in the winter. It's getting dark around 4 or 5 o'clock. So the game finished, I came out, I'm going home. There's an air raid. Now, if you're in a tram which has a little thing going up like in San Francisco, every time you go across an intersection there's a spark. So if there's an air raid, the trams stop immediately and there is no movement of trams. Twice, the convenient place for me was to go into an air raid shelter that was the castle of Newcastle. All those dungeon walls were 6 foot thick, and it was a safe place to be. I spent 2 different air raids in the castle of Newcastle. There was another time I had been over there, and there was an air raid, and I don't know where I was this time, but it was quiet. There weren't any bombs dropping, there weren't anything going on. And I said to myself, my mom and dad are going to be worried about me. Best that I get across the bridge into Gateshead before the trams start. Then I'll be home within 5 minutes. So out I go, I'm going across the bridge, and all of a sudden it became apparent that the bridge was the target for tonight. There were bombs falling on either side of the bridge, and forgive me ladies, I did not have a bowel problem, but I was soaking wet from water splashing up from bombs going off underneath me. But I got home safely, and my parents weren't too angry with me for doing it. What else is bombing? My dad. My dad had 3 brothers who were all serving in the armed forces. My dad was not allowed to enlist. He volunteered, but they turned him down for some stomach problems that he'd had and operations that he had had. The British government didn't want to pay a widow's pension to someone who died because he couldn't get into a hospital soon enough. So my dad volunteered to be a temporary volunteer policeman because all the policemen were in the armed forces. So now you've got to picture this 5'7", 150-pound man with a little uniform on and a little black stick walking into a pub where there was a riot going on. Believe it or not, he'd take his stick. Now then, gentlemen, let's quiet down. And they would quiet down. That's the way things were then. During an air raid, my dad's job, he had one of these, I've talked about these concrete pillars that they built for things. There was one called a warden's post, where air raid wardens met to do their thing. He would climb up on top of the air raid warden's post and stand there. Now as a bomb goes down, blows up over there, there's another bomb falls, blows up over there, there's another bomb falls, thud. It didn't go off. An unexploded bomb. My dad's job was to go and find that hole and stand there and keep people away till the army came to take that bomb out. So it was an interesting time. Now, let me move on, if I may, to rationing. The standard food ration. Now, permit me to read this. The standard food ration: bacon and ham, 4 ounces per person per week. Sugar, 8 ounces of sugar per person per week. I won't continue saying per person per week. Tea, 2 ounces. Meat, this was done differently. Pork was more expensive than chicken. Beef was more expensive than pork, so they had a monetary value that they allowed you to have rather than a given ounce. In 1921, someone estimated that the amount of meat that the average person got would have cost in that year $2.68. So we're talking about maybe the equivalent of a pound of hamburger then. That would be the meat ration. Cheese, 1 ounce. Preserves, jam, 8 ounces. Butter, 2 ounces. Margarine, 4 ounces. Lard, 2 ounces. Sweets, 8 ounces per month. What they meant by sweets, I think, must have been candy, but I don't ever remember getting it. Eggs, 1 egg per week, if there were any available. Milk, 2 quarts of milk per person per week. And the priority, if there was a shortage, the priority was given to pregnant women and children. If you were not a pregnant woman or a child, you didn't get any. And then finally, at some point in time, they rationed fish. I don't remember when they rationed fish, but it says in some of the things I've looked at that they did ration fish. Fish was very expensive, and we always could go to what we called a fish and chip shop. Okay, fish and fries. There was a constant complaint about the poor quality, but it was because of the lousy lard that they were trying to fry it in. So that was not all that it could have been. Clothes were rationed in 1941. You got ration coupons. At the time that we left England to come to America, 1947, the war ended in 45. In 47, my mother said to my dad and I, there's enough ration coupons for to have either a suit or underclothes. My dad took underclothes, I took a suit. I'd never had a suit since the start of the war. Soap was rationed in 1942. Bread, white bread, was totally unavailable throughout the whole war. Never saw a slice of white bread. In 1946, it was rationed so that there was some available. What we had instead of bread was a mixture of whole wheat and something else, and the people called it a grey mush, and that was what they called bread. When we left England in May of 47 to come to America, boarded the Queen Elizabeth, and they sat us down to dinner because we were leaving on the evening tide, and they served us white bread and butter as a starter, and we had not seen it since 1959. So, excuse me, fruit and vegetables were never rationed. It was just a case, if they were available, you could buy them. The price was controlled. We talked earlier about these Anderson shelters being dug into the ground. There were constant competitions made about who had the finest garden on their area shelter. My dad was a butcher. He would bring home excess blood and guts, if you will, and use that to fertilize. He grew leeks that were this big around and won prize after prize for his leeks. Neither my dad nor my mother or I ever ate a leek because we don't like them, but he won prizes for them. What else? I think that about covers rationing. As I say, everything lasted beyond the end of the war. There was a feeble, I mean truly feeble, attempt by the British government to repay some of the goods and chattels we got from America. Cigarettes went from 15 cents a pack to 85 cents a pack, and that tax was used to go to pay back America. They quickly realized that they couldn't do it. The American government, in their kindness, said you don't have to. There are some islands that the British government owned, which they gave to America in the Caribbean. Hawaii, did you ever look at the Hawaiian flag? The Hawaiian flag has all the stripes that we have on our flag. In the upper corner where the stars are, the 50 stars, there's a Union Jack. It was British. We gave it back to America. Oh, we gave it to America. But anyhow, that I think pretty much covers rationing. There was a study, let me find this if I may. There was a study by the University of Cambridge, and what they determined was this. It was determined that rationing improved the health of the British people. Life expectancy increased, infant deaths declined because everyone had access to a varied diet and enough vitamins. Nobody could eat so much they got fat. They had enough to keep the body going, and they had the proper food, even though there wasn't a lot of it. Just for the record though, my British passport, 1947, leaving to come to America, I was 150 pounds and 5'7". 4 years later in the United States, when I went into the Army, drafted into the Army, I was 6 foot and 210 pounds. The difference is diet, kids. One more thing, it's totally out of the realm of what I've been talking about, but I think it's important to me. I was in the Army, going through basic training, Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, as we called it, Fort Lost in the Woods, Missouri. I got called into the office, and the man in charge, the lieutenant in charge, said, "Fraser, we've heard from the Red Cross." I go, uh-oh. Said, "You are to report to the federal court in Detroit on Monday," and he named the date, "and we will give you a pass, long enough for you to get there, go to the court, and get back." So, I leave, go out to the post gate, get on the highway, and thumb my way to St. Louis. I get to St. Louis, and I find out that the airport in Detroit is closed because of winter weather. So I hitchhike back over to the railroad station, get on a train from St. Louis to Chicago, and the Mercury, which was the name of the train, from Chicago to Detroit. So now the next day I have to go down to the courthouse. None of my clothes fit. I was 5'7", now I'm 6 foot. Everything, my shoes were here, my pants were up to my knees. I had to wear my uniform. I went down there, and I'll pass this around, it's no big secret. You might find it interesting to look at. I went down to the courthouse, reported in. They told me, go up to the 3rd floor, you'll see an officer, report to him. I went up the 3rd floor, I saw an officer, he said, "I will open this door and you will go in and sit in the back bench right there at the back and wait until you're called." So he opened the door, I went in, and I got about that far, and I looked up. Up on the bench was this judge, Judge Levine. And I mean no disrespect, but he was a little Jewish fellow. And he went, and I walked up there. He said, "Is your name Fraser?" I said, "Sir, Private Fraser reporting." And he said, "Come here." He looked me in the face and he said, "It is my honor and my privilege to confer citizenship on someone who is in the uniform of the United States Army."
Oh.
And I'll never forget it, of course, but I can't help think today the thousands of people who will never have that experience that I And it has always made me feel that the best thing my parents ever did for me was bring me to America. So, any questions? Yes, ma'am.
You said that in the middle of bombing and all that, you were going to football games?
Yes, ma'am.
So it just how much did life continue as normal outside of the bombing?
They tried to keep it as much normal as possible, and by then schools had reopened because all the kids were coming back home. And I would say that, sure, you went to the theater, a movie, the first thing that came on the screen is, if sirens sound, we will alert you and you can exit the theater from this, this, and this. That sort of thing. Otherwise, you went to the movies. I would say that generally speaking, it was about as close to normal as they could make it. It certainly didn't have any effect on me that I can remember. Anyone else, please? Yes, ma'am.
You talk so calmly about leaving your family with your little paper bag of clothes. How were you feeling about that? Were you afraid or?
No. I think that among other things, my family had brought me up to that point to be independent. Later on, they'd let me go to Newcastle to a soccer game in the middle of whatever. But no, at 8 years of age, I looked around and all my buddies from school were all doing the same thing I was doing. We were all going away. And I can't respond to the long-term effect because some of my friends were gone for 2 years. I was gone for 6 months. So to me, and I have to say, the experience with these ex-school teachers was really a wonderful experience. I got back from them, and my parents had to find a school for me to go to. And the only school they could find at the time was what we called a public school, which means a private school. And I went to something called Beaconsfield School. And I had on my little cap with the green cap with little gold stripes and my jacket with the Beaconsfield emblem on it. And I felt very, very comfortable and very much in good shape. I was not troubled at all.
I got where's the RAF is depleted as these movies show them, you know, in the movies it shows the RAF did, you know, they was about out of planes, about out of pilots, was hit as bad as the movies.
Yes, but again, forgive me, I repeat, God is good. At one point in time, Churchill made a decision. He said, we are going to take these 4 groups of RAF, whether they call them flights or squadrons or what, they're tired, they need to rest. We're just going to have to take them out of the defense of London and let Londoners suffer more. And we'll take them all the way up to Newcastle and let them sit up there and recuperate. The second day they were up there, the Germans sent over 150 bombers and we shot down 92 of them. Because the RAF was there and they didn't expect it and they didn't send any Messerschmitts to protect them.
They was just wore out, wasn't they? They was just completely exhausted pilots.
Yeah, the RAF was, of course, a wonderful organization. Never have so many owed so much to so few. There were people in the RAF who would go up, fight a fight, come back down, get fueled up and ammoed up, and go back up 3 or 4 times a night. There just were not enough of them. One of the things that was most helpful was that circumstances were such that a designer of airplanes had just finished designing what we called the Spitfire. It outgunned, outsped, outmaneuvered a Messerschmitt, and so as soon as we could start producing them, it turned the tide. The other thing is, at the beginning, when they were bombing, they first were bombing military targets in the south of England. there was a feeling among the German General Corps that it wasn't being successful. And so Goering, Air Marshal Goering, said to Hitler, I will bomb the British people and make them surrender. And we can save all of these for the invasion of Russia. So Hitler said, go ahead. And that's when they started shifting the bombing of military targets in England to the bombing of cities in England, which helped win the war. But, you know, like I said, there were 400 people killed in Newcastle. There were 1,700 people killed in the city of Coventry. I've tried to find out how many people were killed in the London Blitz, and I get no answers out of my phone. They just say not available, not available. But yeah, civilians fought the battle just as the military fought the battle. But the RAF, yes, they were almost down to nothing when things got better. Thank you. Anyone else?
About how often were you subjected to bombing when you were back in Newcastle? Like, how often do you think it happened?
I can't answer that. I never counted it.
Yeah. Like, would it happen
I
once
would
every
think
2 weeks,
that
you
I
think?
could say 3 or 4 times a month.
Oh.
When you've got the Newcastle Blitz, that was every night, and as I mentioned about the sugar thing, 3 or 4 times a night. But that was unusual. That was unusual. We were basically too far away from the German bases in France. They had other targets closer that they could reach than Newcastle, which was fortunate for me. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your attention, and again, thank you. I appreciate you all.